As we implement this search functionality, we're going to learn about a very important topic in ASP.NET Core, which is the topic of model binding. Model binding is how ASP.NET Core helps you out by finding things and information that you might need inside of a request. So for example, there's two different ways I can reach this onGet method. And I'm talking about in general. A general way to reach this onGet method is to arrive there as the result of a request that is not doing a search. For example, if I just refresh /restaurants/list, I'm sending off a GET request without a search term, and I just want to see all the restaurants. Same thing would happen if I came into the menu and clicked on restaurants. In that case, I don't need model binding because I don't need any information about the request or any information from the user. But what happens when I type into the search field? Now I need to know that value so I can invoke get restaurants by name and pass in the appropriate name. This is where model binding comes into play. The first step in model binding is to give your inputs a name. So we did not give our search input a name. I'm going to give it a name now, and let's just call it search term. And now I know inside of my onGet method, what I'm looking for is something called search term. One way to find that value would be to go to the HTTP context property. So inside of every Razor page, you'll have a context property, and it represents information about this HTTP transaction, both the request and the response. I can look, for example, at the request, and if I want to dig into HTTP headers to find some sort of access token, I can do that. I can also look at the path, and I can look at the query string. So if I know the search term is going to be in the query string, I can look for it there. But anytime you're using the HTTP context to find something in a request, particularly if it's a form input or a query string parameter or an HTTP header, there's a better way to do that, and that's model binding. All I need to do is tell the ASP.NET Core framework that I need an input that is named search term. There's a couple different ways to do that. One is to simply add a parameter to my onGet method named search term. And now what ASP.NET Core will do when it invokes this method is go out through the request and try to find something that is a search term. It'll look in posted form values, it will look in the query string, it'll look in HTTP headers, and you can even implement your own custom model binder. Just remember, the goal of model binding is to move information from the request into an input model. But this name does have to match. So search term here, and search term is the name of my input. Another way to do this is to use search term as a property, but we'll come back and talk about that later. But right now, assuming I have a search term, I'm going to pass that into get restaurants by name. And I do just want to point out, if we arrive at this method without a search term, so let's say the user has just selected restaurants from the menu, what the ASP.NET Core model binder will do if it does not find a search term is simply pass a null reference for this string value. That works with reference types. If for some reason this was an integer parameter, which is a value type, then ASP.NET Core would have to throw an exception. It would say, I did not find a search term, and since I cannot pass null, I'm going to throw an exception. But with strings, that's kind of like saying search term is optional. And to test this, I'm going to save all my files and come out to the browser and do a hard refresh on this page, /restaurants/list. What I'm hoping to see, and I do, is that I still have a list of all three restaurants. But what happens if I search for the string SC, and now I have just Scott's Pizza? And if I go out and search for just an L, I see just my one Mexican restaurant. And where do these values appear? Where are they passed to my application? They're passed in the query string. So /restaurants/list query string. Search term equals L. Let's try search term equals S just by typing directly in the browser. Yes, Scott's Pizza appears there. And if I remove the search term entirely, we'll go back to the list of three restaurants. Now, let's go back to doing a search for SC, and you'll notice something peculiar about this form, which is that the value SC does not appear in the input. It might be nice, from a user's perspective, to keep my search term in this input so I know what I've searched for, and I could even come up here and modify it. Currently, that's not happening because when we render the input, we're always setting the value equal to an empty string. In order to solve this problem, not only do we need to know the search term inside of the onGet method, we need to know the search term here that the user entered. We're also going to need to know the search term when we render this input so we can specify the correct value. Let's see how to do that in the next clip.